What's the takeaway for our audience? Like, what can people do at home? It's hard to treat a chronic problem, like the long-term effects, but to stop the problem from happening in the first place, I call it emotional first aid. And what are the best remedies for emotional first aid? The first one I would think of is Ignatia, because it covers such a wide variety of intense emotions. It could be betrayal, humiliation, abandonment, sudden grief, frustration, indignation, a lot of the emotions a child would experience with the kind of baseball father you described, you know. So you probably have, I think, an Ignatia case.
Yeah, in my book, I use the case of a woman who's about to get married. She's been seeing someone for a long time. Everything's been going great. They're really compatible. Both families are in tune with each other. They've been making plans. Everything is going smoothly. Wedding is arranged. Day comes. The guy doesn't show up. Mm-hmm. He jilts her completely out of the blue. Mm-hmm.
In a really cruel way.
Really cruel. I mean, these days, I guess we're getting desensitized to that because people are breaking up
by text.
By text and stuff like that. But in my example, it's just the old-fashioned kind of horror. Now, so the soil that this remedy state grows in is someone who is basically trusting in principle. And the way I've laid out the story, everything was going so well. It would be surprising if she wasn't invested in principle. You know? So when there's a trauma like this, which is a shock, it's not realistic to expect the idea of principle to disappear. So what does happen instead? The principle inverts. The principle inverts. As opposed to everything working out okay, the psyche now says, look, I'm invested in principle, but I've learned something horrendous from this shock. It must be that it's not the problem of having a principle. The problem is that the principle has inverted. Everything is supposed to become a screw-up. So someone who needs Ignatia, their emotions are very all over the place.
Very
they get a lump in their
polarized,
throat,
yeah.
very polarized. But if you have a discussion, get into a discussion with them, they will turn it into a victimization. Suddenly they'll create it in such a way that it's suddenly that as if you've attacked them. I love giving Ignatia because at the end of it, of course, they'll need other grief remedies. But when they come back, they'll say something like, your remedy did nothing, but everybody's being nice to me now. So that's one.
Right, yeah. And then gelsemium, the remedy for
gelsemium.
Emotional shutdown.
Emotional shutdown. It's a famous remedy for the flu, of course, but homeopaths know this secret that usually you're going to become susceptible to the flu from having had a setback, something frightening. And it can just be a sudden loss of money that you know, like a loss of income. There's many kinds of setbacks we can experience. In a recent case of mine, a woman who I've been working with for quite some long time, who had overcome a lot in her life from having been abused and being denigrated, made a lot of progress. She had divorced a husband who was, she actually completely outgrew her husband, who was an old-fashioned, very repressive kind of a guy. She found another relationship, was going pretty well. But this relationship ended in also kind of a devastating fashion that forced her to go back and live in a house that her father had renovated for her, and it was completely full of memories that the idea that she was now regressing. So this idea of a setback, she was set back, and consequently she came to me. She was shaking. She wanted to just escape, lie in or go in a room. She wanted to close her eyes. This is gelsemium, and it has many of the features of a flu without actually being a flu, but you could sort of see how that would predispose you to something like that.
Right. So people could actually get these remedies in a health food store in a 30C potency, very reasonable, moderate potency, very safe. When people are in an extreme emotional upset, they're either reacting with strong emotions like Ignatia or kind of emotional shutdown and retreat like gelsemium.
Yeah.
It's great to treat it on the spot and very safe to treat kids who are upset. Yeah. So that's something people could do to be able to use homeopathy at home.
It's true. I mean, if the remedy state has so many features, someone might suddenly say, like in a gelsemium state, that she's unable to focus her eyes. She can't see anymore. She could end up in an eye, ear, nose, and throat hospital or see an eye doctor, when simply correcting this at the mind-body level with gelsemium would take care of the whole thing.
Well, I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation in our second show.